Have you ever experienced something that logic alone could not fully explain? Maybe you thought about somebody, and moments later they suddenly contacted you. Maybe you dreamed something that later happened in real life. Maybe as a parent, you somehow sensed your child was in danger before anybody told you. Or maybe as a child yourself, you felt deeply connected to the world in ways that seemed magical. Throughout history, human beings across nearly every culture have reported mysterious experiences involving telepathy, intuition, premonitions, dream communication, and strange forms of awareness beyond ordinary senses. For thousands of years, these stories were dismissed as myths, spiritual beliefs, or coincidence. But something fascinating happened during the last century. Scientists, psychologists, neuroscientists, and researchers around the world actually began studying these phenomena seriously. And while the subject remains controversial, some of the stories, experiments, and results became so strange that the debate continues even today. Take a moment to reflect on that, because this documentary may completely change the way you think about consciousness itself. Now, before we continue, it's important to remain balanced and thoughtful. Not every supernatural claim online is real. Some videos are fake. Some demonstrations involve illusion or suggestion, and many researchers remain skeptical. But this documentary explores real historical research, real experiments, real scientists, and real stories that have fascinated humanity for generations. Take a slow, deep breath in and gently breathe out. Beautiful. Now let's begin in the late 1800s. At this time, a group of scholars, scientists, and philosophers in Britain became deeply interested in unusual human experiences. They formed an organization called the Society for Psychical Research in London in 1882. And surprisingly, many respected intellectuals joined. Their goal was not blind belief. It was investigation. They studied telepathy, premonitions, mediumship, near-death experiences, apparitions, and unusual mental phenomena using scientific methods available at the time. One of their earliest major studies focused on something called crisis apparitions. Thousands of people reported suddenly seeing or sensing loved ones during moments of death or extreme danger, sometimes before receiving news anything had happened. Researchers collected huge numbers of testimonies from ordinary people across different countries. Now, skeptics argued coincidence and selective memory explained these reports, but researchers noticed the stories were surprisingly common. Take a moment to think about that, because humanity has been documenting these mysterious experiences for far longer than most people realize. Now, my friends, one of the earliest famous telepathy experiments involved a researcher named J.B. Rhine at Duke University in the 1930s. Rhine wanted to test whether people could somehow perceive information beyond ordinary senses. He used special cards called Zener cards, simple symbols like circles, stars, waves, and crosses. Participants attempted to guess hidden symbols while separated from the cards physically. After thousands upon thousands of trials, Rhine claimed some participants scored significantly above chance. This became one of the first major attempts to study extrasensory perception under laboratory conditions. The scientific world became divided. Some researchers believed Rhine discovered evidence of psychic phenomena. Others argued flaws in methods explained the results. But regardless of opinion, these experiments helped launch decades of consciousness research around the world. Take a moment to reflect on that, because serious universities really did explore these topics. Now, during the Cold War, things became even stranger. Both the United States and Soviet Union became interested in psychic research. Why? Because intelligence agencies worried the opposing side might develop unusual mental abilities useful for espionage or warfare. This sounds unbelievable, but historical documents later revealed Real government-funded programs existed. One of the most famous was the American Stargate Project. Researchers explored remote viewing, the alleged ability to mentally perceive distant locations or hidden targets without physical contact. Participants attempted describing secret locations, objects, or activities from far away. One well-known remote viewer, named Joseph McMoneagle, reportedly participated in numerous government experiments. Some officials later claimed certain results appeared surprisingly accurate. Critics argued vague descriptions and confirmation bias explained the apparent successes. But what fascinated the public was this. Governments themselves took these possibilities seriously enough to spend years researching them. Take a moment to think about that. I'm sure your future self will thank you. Now, my friends, there is another fascinating chapter in the history of consciousness research many people have never heard about. In the 1970s and 1980s, scientists at Princeton University created something called the PEAR Laboratory, the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab. And this was not a small fringe project. It operated for nearly 3 decades. Researchers there studied whether human intention and consciousness could subtly influence physical systems. One famous area involved random number generators, machines designed to produce completely random outcomes. Participants attempted mentally influencing the machines through focused intention alone. Over many years and millions of trials, researchers claimed they observed tiny but statistically unusual shifts away from pure randomness. Now, critics argued the effects were extremely small and difficult to interpret. But supporters believed the experiments hinted at something profound, that consciousness itself may interact with reality in ways science still barely understands. Take a moment to think about that, because for thousands of years, ancient traditions claimed thought, attention, and intention carried real influence. Now, modern science was beginning to cautiously ask similar questions again. Now, my friends, another fascinating area of study involves dreams. Throughout history, many cultures believed dreams could sometimes contain information beyond ordinary awareness. Ancient Egyptians kept dream temples. Indigenous tribes treated dreams as sacred guidance. Buddhist and Hindu traditions explored lucid dreaming and consciousness during sleep. Even famous thinkers, such as Carl Jung, believed dreams connected deeply to the unconscious mind. Certain dreams became incredibly difficult to explain. One famous historical example involved Abraham Lincoln. Shortly before his assassination, Lincoln reportedly described a strange dream involving mourning inside the White House. In the dream, he saw grieving crowds and a covered body. When he asked who had died, a voice replied, "The president." Now, skeptics argue the story may have been exaggerated later, but it became one of the most famous premonition stories in history. Another famous case involved people dreaming about disasters before they occurred. After the Titanic disaster, researchers collected reports from individuals who claimed they experienced disturbing dreams or intuitive warnings beforehand. Again, coincidence may explain many cases, but when thousands of people across history continue reporting similar experiences, human curiosity naturally remains alive. Take a moment to reflect on that. Because perhaps the unconscious mind processes reality in ways we do not fully understand consciously. Now, my friends, let's talk about one of the most emotional and controversial subjects of all: near-death experiences. For centuries, people who nearly died sometimes returned describing extraordinary experiences. Floating above the body, moving through darkness toward light, feeling overwhelming peace and unconditional love, encountering deceased relatives, reviewing their entire life, and perhaps most fascinating of all, many near-death experiences sound remarkably similar across cultures worldwide. Doctors, scientists, and psychologists began studying these reports seriously during the 20th century. One famous researcher was Dr. Raymond Moody, who popularized the term near-death experience. Another was Dr. Pim van Lommel, a Dutch cardiologist who studied cardiac arrest patients scientifically. In several documented cases, patients later described details from operating rooms during periods when measurable brain activity appeared absent or severely reduced. Critics argue memory, hallucination, oxygen deprivation, or brain chemistry may explain these experiences, but many people who experience NDEs describe them as more real than ordinary life itself. And importantly, these experiences often completely transform people afterward. They become less materialistic, less fearful of death, more compassionate, more spiritual, and more connected to humanity. Take a moment to think about that, because perhaps consciousness itself is far deeper than modern society currently assumes. Now, my friends, another area researchers explored was meditation itself. Modern brain imaging studies found long-term meditators often show measurable differences in attention, emotional regulation, stress response, and brain activity. Some Tibetan monks participating in neuroscience studies demonstrated extraordinary control over focus and awareness during meditation. Researchers studying mindfulness discovered meditation can physically affect areas of the brain connected to anxiety, attention, memory, and emotional processing. And this becomes deeply interesting when connected to ancient spiritual traditions, because thousands of years ago, mystics and yogis already believed consciousness could be trained and expanded through deep awareness practices. Take a moment to reflect on that, because ancient wisdom and modern neuroscience are beginning to overlap in fascinating ways. Now, my friends, one of the strangest stories ever studied involved something called the telephone telepathy experiments. Researcher Rupert Sheldrake explored whether people could predict who was calling them before answering the phone. Participants named several possible callers. Then, someone randomly called them. Participants guessed correctly more often than random chance predicted. Again, critics challenged methodology and interpretation, but these experiments fascinated millions because nearly everyone has experienced moments that feel strangely similar. Thinking about somebody, then suddenly hearing from them, feeling somebody's emotional state before they speak, sensing tension instantly upon entering a room. Now, science may eventually explain many of these experiences through subconscious observation and pattern recognition. But even that possibility is extraordinary, because it suggests the human mind constantly processes vastly more information than conscious awareness notices directly. Take a slow, deep breath in and gently breathe out. Beautiful. Now, my friends, let's return to children once more, because many fascinating stories throughout history involve young children appearing unusually intuitive or aware. Researchers notice something interesting about early childhood development. Young children spend much more time in slower theta brainwave states, brain states associated with imagination, deep learning, creativity, dreamlike awareness, and subconscious absorption. Adults often enter similar states during meditation, deep relaxation, creative flow, or hypnosis. This led some researchers and spiritual thinkers to wonder, could children naturally perceive the world differently before heavy conditioning shapes perception? Take a moment to reflect on that, because children may experience reality in ways adults forget over time. Now, one of the most famous modern researchers studying children and unusual memories was Dr. Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia. For decades, Stevenson investigated thousands of cases involving children who claimed to remember previous lives. His research became famous because he carefully documented details scientifically. Some children described names, places, families, or events they seemingly had no normal way of knowing. In some cases, researchers later verified surprisingly accurate details connected to deceased individuals. Critics argued coincidence, cultural influence, or subconscious information could explain the stories. But even skeptics admitted some cases were difficult to dismiss easily. Stevenson spent over 40 years documenting these reports across countries including India, Sri Lanka, Lebanon, Thailand, and the United States. Take a moment to think about that, because these stories continue fascinating psychologists and consciousness researchers today. Now, my friends, another famous researcher was Rupert Sheldrake. Sheldrake explored unusual human and animal intuition for decades. One of his most famous studies involved the feeling of being stared at. Have you ever suddenly turned around and caught somebody watching you? Sheldrake tested whether people could sometimes sense observation without normal cues. He also studied telephone telepathy, experiments where participants attempted predicting who was calling before answering the phone. Again, the results remain controversial, but Sheldrake argued human beings may possess forms of connection modern science does not yet fully explain. Now, one of the most emotional areas of research involves parents and children. Stories appear globally of mothers suddenly sensing danger involving their children from great distances. One famous account involved a mother who woke suddenly in panic at the exact moment her child experienced a serious accident overseas. Another involved a father who became overwhelmed with unexplained anxiety moments before learning his son was injured. Are these coincidence? Possibly. But what fascinates researchers is how common these stories are worldwide. Take a moment to reflect on that, because emotional bonds themselves may involve deeper layers of awareness than people realize. Now, my friends, let's explore one of the most controversial modern topics: blindfolded children demonstrations. In countries such as India, Indonesia, Russia, and parts of Asia, videos in training schools emerged, claiming certain children could identify colors, read books, ride bicycles, or navigate obstacles while fully blindfolded. Some called it mind vision. Others called it intuition training, or heightened perception. Critics strongly argued many demonstrations involved hidden gaps, poor controls, or performance tricks. Professional magicians often explained how some blindfold techniques could be manipulated. However, the reason these stories spread so rapidly worldwide is because many parents witnessed demonstrations firsthand and became fascinated by the possibility of hidden human potential. Take a moment to think about that, because humanity has always searched for deeper meaning and hidden abilities beyond ordinary life. Now, my friends, another fascinating area of research involved twins. Throughout history, many twins have reported strange experiences, feeling each other's emotions, thinking similar thoughts, or sensing distress from great distances. Some twins even described simultaneous dreams or emotional reactions during emergencies. Scientists often explain this through deep emotional bonding, shared genetics, and highly similar life experiences. But some stories still remain difficult to explain fully. One famous story involved twins separated geographically, when one suddenly experienced intense emotional distress. At the same moment, the other suffered a serious accident. Again, skeptics argue coincidence. Believers argue deeper connection. But perhaps the most fascinating part is this: human emotional connection itself may already be far more powerful than we fully understand. Take a slow, deep breath in and gently breathe out. Beautiful. Now let's explore another fascinating topic: presentiment. Presentiment studies explore whether the human body sometimes reacts to events before conscious awareness recognizes them. In some experiments, participants were connected to equipment measuring subtle physiological changes: heart rate, skin conductance, and nervous system responses. Then random emotional or neutral images appeared suddenly on screens. Some researchers reported that the body occasionally showed subtle reactions milliseconds before emotionally intense images appeared. Supporters argue this may suggest unconscious anticipatory awareness. Critics remain skeptical and argue methodological issues may explain the findings. But again, the existence of these experiments reveals how deeply scientists still struggle to fully explain consciousness and perception. Take a moment to reflect on that, because perhaps human awareness is more layered and mysterious than ordinary daily life suggests. Now, my friends, One reason these topics capture humanity so deeply is because they challenge the modern idea that human beings are completely separate, isolated individuals. Many ancient spiritual traditions believed consciousness itself is interconnected, like waves appearing separate on the ocean's surface, while still belonging to the same ocean underneath. Buddhism taught interconnectedness. Hindu philosophy explored universal consciousness. Mystical Christianity spoke about unity. Sufism described divine connection. Indigenous cultures often believed all life was spiritually connected through unseen energy and awareness. And interestingly, modern quantum physics has also challenged simple classical ideas about separation. Now, this does not prove telepathy directly, and many physicists strongly warn people against oversimplifying quantum ideas spiritually. But some researchers exploring consciousness theories believe reality itself may be far stranger and more interconnected than traditional models assumed. Take a moment to think about that. I'm sure your future self will thank you. Now, let me tell you one of the most emotional stories commonly discussed in intuition research. A mother suddenly woke in panic in the middle of the night. She felt overwhelming fear concerning her daughter far away. Moments later, the phone rang. Her daughter had been involved in a serious accident at nearly the exact same moment the mother awoke. Stories like this appear globally across cultures, religions, and generations. Now, skeptics often explain these experiences through coincidence and memory bias, and sometimes that may absolutely be true. But when similar emotional connection stories happen millions of times across humanity, many people naturally begin wondering whether emotional bonds themselves may involve deeper forms of intuitive awareness, especially between parents and children. Take a moment to reflect on that, because love itself may connect human beings more deeply than modern society fully understands. Now, my friends, there is another important reason children's intuition fascinates researchers. Children often notice things adults ignore. They observe emotional tension, energy shifts, micro-expressions, behavior patterns, and because their perception remains less filtered, they sometimes appear remarkably intuitive socially and emotionally. In many cases, what adults call psychic may partly involve heightened subconscious observation. But even this possibility is fascinating, because it means human beings may possess far greater perceptual intelligence than most people realize consciously. Now, modern society creates another challenge entirely: constant stimulation, notifications, fast entertainment, fragmented attention. Children today often spend far less time in silence, in nature, imagining, or developing inner awareness. And many psychologists believe attention itself is becoming increasingly fragmented. This is why mindfulness practices may become so important for future generations. Because mindfulness strengthens focus, presence, self-awareness, emotional intelligence, attention regulation, and nervous system calm. And perhaps, even if telepathy never becomes fully scientifically proven, learning deep awareness itself may already be one of the greatest human abilities possible. Take a moment to think about that. I'm sure your future self will thank you. Now, throughout history, many extraordinary individuals explored hidden aspects of consciousness. Carl Jung explored synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that seem mysteriously connected. Nikola Tesla believed humanity underestimated the power of energy and vibration. William James argued consciousness research deserved serious scientific attention. The philosopher Henri Bergson proposed the brain may function partly as a filter, limiting greater consciousness rather than creating it entirely. Even Albert Einstein described reality as deeply mysterious and interconnected. Take a moment to reflect on that, because some of history's greatest minds remained humble about how much humanity still does not understand. Now, my friends, Whether telepathy eventually becomes fully proven scientifically or not, this subject reveals something deeply important about human beings. People long for connection, meaning, mystery, depth, because modern society often reduces human life to productivity, consumption, screens, stress, and material success. But deep inside, many people still sense there may be more to consciousness, intuition, love, and awareness than modern culture fully explains. And perhaps that intuition itself is meaningful. Now, imagine a future where science continues exploring consciousness openly without fear or ridicule, where spirituality and science no longer fight each other blindly, but work together, exploring the mysteries of awareness respectfully. Because real intelligence is not blind belief, and it is not arrogant dismissal either. Real intelligence remains curious, open-minded, balanced, grounded, and willing to say, maybe we still have much more to learn. Take a moment to think about that. Because humanity's understanding of consciousness may still be in its infancy. Now, before we finish together, I want you to remember something deeply important. Even if somebody never experiences telepathy, premonitions, or extraordinary phenomena, human beings already possess incredible abilities: empathy, compassion, intuition, creativity, love, presence, the ability to deeply influence one another emotionally. And maybe, in a distracted world becoming increasingly disconnected, the greatest hidden power is not supernatural at all. Maybe the greatest power is becoming fully present with another human being again, listening deeply, feeling deeply, caring deeply. Because true human connection itself may already be one of the most extraordinary experiences in existence. Take one final, slow, deep breath in and gently breathe out. Beautiful. Now silently repeat inside your mind. The human mind is deeply mysterious. Again, I remain curious and aware. And finally, connection begins with presence. If this documentary found you at the right time, there are deeper mindfulness journeys waiting for you on this channel. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next mindfulness journey.